Welcome everyone. I'm going to mute everyone. Rabbi, you can unmute yourself. I said before everybody was here, I will put into the chat. We're having get your own latke materials and donuts. You can pick either or. I picked both. You know, that's healthy. That Hanukkah food can't get more healthy than that. Um, and we need to place the order soon. And with that, Rabbi, you're on. I'm gonna spotlight you
Great.
until I share my until
Uh,
I share my screen.
just let me add on to that Latka event that there actually is an event involved as well. So there's picking up the materials, but then on Sunday afternoon, there's going to be kind of, let's make our own latkes together online with some instructional help and a little bit of Hanukkah teaching and wisdom from me. So look forward to seeing you on that Sunday. I think, is it the 12th or the 13th, Vanessa?
I'm gonna have to look, and I will put that. And we're gonna remind you again at the end, and I'll put up share my screen. But we're also showing the movie The Outrageous Sophie Tucker, which was from 2014, and we hope you can join us Monday at 7:30.
So when you say showing it, you mean we're discussing it.
We're
You should watch
discussing
it on
it.
your own.
Yes,
It's
yes.
available on
Amazon Prime.
Amazon Prime. Thank you. And it's a documentary about Sophie Tucker. So it's definitely worth watching, and we'll get together and discuss it with our monthly film group on that Tuesday evening.
No,
So
Monday. It's Monday.
Monday evening. Sorry, Monday. Thank you. So so let's talk about Yentl for a while. So Yentl, the musical, directed by Barbra Streisand, starring Barbra Streisand, produced by Barbra Streisand, in part written by Barbra Streisand. Right? It's a true labor of love, I think, but even more than love, it's about artistic tenacity. And Barbra Streisand first encountered this story by Isaac Bashevis Singer, according to what she said, in 1968, around the time that she was starring in Funny Girl, and won the Oscar that year for her appearance in Funny Girl, and started to tell people that the next thing that she was going to do was going to be a movie version of this story by Isaac Bashevis Singer, Yentl the Yeshiva Boy. The story was published in a collection of Isaac Bashevis Singer's short stories in 1962. So, but Barbra Streisand read it in 1968, intended it to be the next movie that she was going to make. Sought out people to write a script and so forth. The movie, as you probably realize, doesn't come out until 1983. So that's 15 years that it took, for her to actually get this off the ground. It was turned down by every studio in Hollywood in the 1960s, even though Barbra Streisand had just won the Oscar. I mean, she was considered to be, she was obviously a big Broadway star already. She'd already won Tony Awards and Grammy Awards for her albums. I think she'd already won her Emmy Award for television specials, and now wins the Oscar. So among the rare artists who've won all four of those awards, but still didn't have the clout, as we say, to get this movie made in 1968, 69, when she was shopping it around. The studios felt that it was far too parochial a story, there's no way that it would make money or be successful. It was too Jewish, right? There was they did not see the universal appeal of this property. Now we can contrast that with Fiddler on the Roof that we're going to look at next week, which somehow seems to have international appeal, universal appeal, Um, Yentl was thought to be too inside, right? Too much about the Jewish experience to have any kind of a, um, you know, universal kind of appeal. So it was turned down by everybody. Uh, Eventually, a studio agrees to take it on. Um, not until the late 1970s. And then after they spent a huge amount of money on Michael Cimino's movie Heaven's Gate, and it essentially bankrupted the studio that was going to do Yentl. She's out again looking for financing for this movie. In the meantime, I think the movie undergoes a dramatic change. And again, this is um, there's a compromise that needs to be made in a sense between the marketplace and what the marketplace will support and what the artist wants to do. So artistic integrity sometimes works hand in hand with commercial viability, and sometimes it doesn't. Had Barbra Streisand made this movie in 1968, it probably would have been a very small art house kind of movie. The music had not been written yet. It was not going to be a musical. I mean, when she fell in love with this story, I mean, she fell in love with this story and she wanted to tell it much the way Isaac Bashevis Singer told it, I think. So by the time it gets made in 1983, it has changed, right? It becomes a musical with songs by Marilyn and Alan Bergman, I think, a married couple who had already been very successful in scoring and songwriting, so forth. And they write the songs that become the songs for Yentl at Barbra Streisand's request. And so it transforms from kind of this small art house movie into something quite different than that, a star vehicle, if you will, for Barbra Streisand. And some people find in that kind of an egotism, right, on her part. But I think that I think it's more fair to say that she wanted to make this movie so much that she was willing to do what it took to get it made. And to get it made, the biggest star, you know, as she sings about in Fanny Girl, has to and Funny Girl, has to make sure that she's in every scene, right? I mean, I don't think there's a scene in this movie where Barbra Streisand does not appear. If it is, it's so fleeting that it doesn't register, right? She sings all the songs. You know, Mandy Patinkin is a wonderful singer. Many of you know him from musicals like Sunday in the Park with George, right? You know, he originated that role of George Serotta on Broadway, and is a marvelous singer. He doesn't sing a note in this movie, right? All of the songs are sung by Streisand. All, you know, everything revolves around her. The short story that this comes from is a little, um, it's not quite as centered, even though it's the title character, Yentl the yeshiva boy. It's not quite as centered on this. And in fact, the first words of the short story are after her father died. Right? So the all of those first few scenes of the movie, which are about Yentl in her father's house, studying with her father and all of those things, all of that happens before um, uh, you know, the short story begins. Also, the short story is very worthwhile. It's very worth tracking down and reading it. I believe it's in, I'm forgetting the name of the collection it was first published in. It was published on its own as well. I mean, it's not hard to find in Singer's collected stories or in a variety of different formats that you can find if you want to read it. I'm sure you can get it on your Kindle or whatever electronic reading device too. It's very interesting to compare and contrast the two. The other thing that happens before the action of the story starts that is very different from the movie is that Avigdor has already been rejected as the suitor, right? And he is in fact marrying a widow named Pesha in the story. So he's married to someone else altogether in the story, even though he loves Hadass, right? But he's married and sort of trapped in a loveless marriage with a widow named Pesha, who is it's a very difficult marriage. The other thing, of course, that changes pretty dramatically from the story to the movie is the ending. The end of the movie, which sees Barbara Streisand dressed as a woman on a ship heading for America, is not what happens at the end of the story. At the end of the story, Anshel is still dressing as Anshel and heading off to another town to find another yeshiva where he can study. Right. So we can talk about those differences as we go today, if you like. The other thing that she does, which it strikes me as curious, is she changes the time period a little bit. Not entirely sure why, but from the late 1870s to the early 1900s. So it's not a huge difference in time, but I think it's a big difference in time in the Jewish world. So you know, I in the 1870s, she would have, you know, getting on a ship and going to America was still relatively rare. I mean, that really gets started in the 1880s and 1890s. 1904 is when my own grandfather came to America. It was a huge year for Jewish immigration. 1903 was the Kishinev pogroms, which almost undoubtedly is why my grandfather came to America. I mean, it was a watershed event in the Jewish community of Europe, and so putting it in 1904. I mean, you know, I'm not sure if the whole reason for it is to put her on that boat to America at the end of the movie, but I think it might be, right? That she, and in a sense, even though she's traveling alone to America, she is traveling with a huge number of Jewish immigrants. You know, you see some of them on board the boat, but in brief, but just this idea that puts it into a pretty different context than the life of Jews in Poland in the 1870s. Very different. Um, so as I said, it's a real tribute to her tenacity that she stuck with it. She got it made. It really certainly speaks to Barbara Streisand's commitment both to Judaism and to feminism. And both of these things are extremely important to her, and she shows it in this. Sort of a cute side note that the first place where she promoted this movie was actually in New York City. She was at the annual dinner of the UJA, the United Jewish Appeal in New York, where she was presented the Man of the Year award, right, as it was called. So I just think it's sort of very clever, perhaps. I mean, right? You know, here she is playing a woman who dresses like a man and accepting the Man of the Year award. You know, similar to how Time Magazine used to, it was the Man of the Year, right? Now it's the Person of the Year. And occasionally, it's not even human. The thing. The thing of the year that you know, Time Magazine gives its award to. So, but just kind of clever that that was a part of what she did. So, so there are some themes in this movie that I think are extremely important to her. Certainly the, you know, feminism is a big part of this, and I'd say again, this is not quite, you know, the axe that she's grinding is not exactly the axe that uh, Isaac Bashevis Singer is grinding in his story. It's you know, you might just call it differences of scale in a sense. You know, the story came out, of course, in 1962. That's a year before Betty Friedan releases the feminine mystique, right? So in fact, 1962, when this volume of stories came out, this particular story was singled out by some of the reviewers for ridicule. It was not something that society was ready to hear, even in 1962, right? So it's kind of interesting that it wasn't really thought of as one of Singer's best stories, right, at the time that it came out. And it's hard not to see in that a kind of a patriarchal reaction to a story that is challenging to the patriarchy, right? Now, those things, I would say that's the nugget in this that Singer and Streisand have in common. But Streisand, even though it's just a short story, I mean, movies sometimes have to sort of streamline the plot, and I'd say that Streisand's movie focuses in on this issue of feminism in a way that the story doesn't. I mean, the story, I would argue that the story is more about how Judaism as it was practiced at that time in the 1870s in Eastern Europe was so locked into its own way of looking at things, so locked into and not locked into the study of the law and these kinds of things as much as locked into a kind of a superstition, right? That there's a lot in this brief 20-page story of Singer's, as I recall it, about demons and the way that we bring these demons into the world, and how humans cut themselves off from the world to come, right, through their misbehavior. So there's a kind of a different kind of axe to grind here, which is about how Singer is definitely in the court of Anschel being allowed to learn. That women should be equal, that women should be allowed to learn. That's definitely a part of it. But what I'm trying to get across is that his concern is much more about what's happening to a Judaism that doesn't allow these things, right? That there's a kind of a superstition that's holding Judaism hostage and keeping real progress, I guess, at bay. So I guess if to try and put it into a nutshell, Streisand is very concerned about this individual woman and her right to self-fulfillment, and Singer is more concerned about the body of Judaism and what's happening to it because of its parochial, old-fashioned, superstitious ways. So they're kind of different, but certainly you can find the seeds of what Streisand was doing in his story. We'll say Isaac Bashevis Singer didn't like the movie. There were a few reasons that he gave for not liking it. Some of them ring sort of hollow in retrospect. He didn't like the music, among other things. And I think in this one, I would tend to agree with him. He didn't like the music because it didn't sound Jewish to him. Again, as we're going to watch Fiddler on the Roof for next week, compare these two scores, right? And think about how different they are. Both scores are written by Jewish composers, right? But to my ear, there's nothing that sounds Jewish in the Yentl songs, right? They are pop songs through and through. And it was a very, again, is this deliberate, right? I mean, is this part of, this is the only way I can get this movie made, and that's important to me? Or was it a matter of love? Did she love these songs and think that this is the way to tell the story? You may notice from a filmmaking perspective, nobody ever sings in this movie, right? This it's all takes place in her head, right? Rarely, if ever, does she actually open her mouth when the songs are playing, right? There is a montage of images. You know, you could, this is the beginning of 1983. You know, MTV is just getting started on television, right? The age of rock videos, which begins in some similar kinds of ways, right? The sound, the music is playing, and there are images that go on while the music plays in the background, right? That's what happens in this movie. The composers, Marilyn and Alan Bergman, say that what they had in mind is that all of these songs are sung by Yentl to her father. Uh, one of the songs was nominated for the Oscar for Best Song. Actually, two songs from the movie were nominated for Best Song. Neither of them won. I think you know, sometimes the conventional wisdom in Oscar language is that when two things from the same movie are nominated, they split the vote, and somebody else comes through and wins, right? So so Papa, Can You Hear Me, which is the one that explicitly is her singing to her father, right? And the song The Way He Makes Me Feel were both nominated for Best Song. Neither of them won. So was that the year that the theme song from Arthur won? I'm not sure. Um, but so at any rate, the way the songwriters imagined it is that each of these songs is Yentl singing to her father, the only person to whom she can reveal her essential self, is what Marilyn Bergman said about it. So so is the fact that the music doesn't sound Jewish, is that one of these compromises that has to be made for the sake of getting the movie done, for the sake of addressing the masses? And you know, there's no question, well, that this was a popular soundtrack, right? It did very well. So what we don't know is if it sounded more Jewish, would it have been just as popular? Had it had elements of the klezmer sound and things like that, but is one of the things that Isaac Singer didn't like about it. And so, you know, he thought it was, so we talked about at the beginning, as some people have seen it, a kind of a major ego trip for Barbra Streisand, and not, and of course he didn't like that there were changes to some of the plot points, you know, changing the ending and things like that. But I have to say, you know, some of it does sound like sour grapes. Isaac Bashevis was a great writer. He won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1978, I think. I actually met him that year, in 1978. I was a college student in Madison, Wisconsin. He spoke at Hillel, and he had just won the Nobel Prize in Literature. And I got to, he came, it was a Shabbat. And so I got to sit at his Shabbat table, because at the time we were both vegetarians, and all the vegetarians had to sit at the same table, so they knew what to bring for us to eat. So at the time I was the editor of the Jewish student newspaper on campus. So what could be better than being, you know, I was all of, you know, 19 years old, sitting next to Isaac Bashevis Singer at a Shabbat dinner, and I'm a journalist, right? And you know, he's a Nobel Prize winning author. So so this movie had not yet been made, so we obviously couldn't talk about that. But it was a remarkable experience in my memory to have met him, and he seemed like a very genuine, very humble, and very humane man. But I think when you read some of the things he said about Yentl after it came out, I think it hurt him that more people saw this movie than ever read one of his books, right? And so that was hurtful to him. So um,
Rabbi,
yeah,
so I looked it up. They did get original song score and its
right,
adaptation
yeah,
by Michael Legrand, Alan Bergman, and Marilyn Bergman. But the song that won that year
yeah.
was Flashdance, What a Feeling.
Oh yeah. Also written by a Jewish guy, I think, though, Neil
Oh,
Kotler, I think, didn't he?
it says Irene Cara and Giorgio Moroder.
Marauder. I don't think they wrote it though. I think Irene Cara's the performer.
Yes,
Marauder is the producer, I think.
right.
Um,
I'll keep.
maybe I think there were a number of different people who wrote songs for that movie, but one of them was a guy named Doug Kotler, who
I know him.
yeah, right. So after he wrote music for Flashdance and made a lot of money, he became a Jewish composer, and he started writing songs for synagogues and stuff like that. So he didn't have to make money anymore after Flashdance. But I'm not sure if he wrote that particular.
Didn't. Giorgio Moroder did.
Yeah. Okay. So. Um, that was a digression. The singer, of course, didn't like the change in the ending. And I was one of the other. So the movie did win, as Vanessa said, for best score, which is, there's two separate categories still. I mean, there's the best score, best soundtrack, um, and a separate one for best original song. Right, so nominated for 2 Oscars for Best Original Song, didn't win either of them. It did win the Best Score. It was also nominated, Amy Irving was nominated for Best Supporting Actress, this movie. And it was also nominated for Best Art Direction and Set Decoration, which perhaps is a deserving nomination. I mean, I have to say, and again, I'd love for you to hear your thoughts as we compare this movie to Fiddler on the Roof next week. This movie, of course, was shot in studio in California. You'll see that Fiddler on the Roof was shot on location in, I think actually at the time it was called Yugoslavia, if memory serves. So the difference between the way the shtetl and the town look in this movie in Yentl versus how the shtetl looks in Fiddler on the Roof is worthy of some comparison, I think. I think that it looks, it reminds me of what we talked about when we were, the first movie we talked about, Elia Kazan's Gentleman's Agreement, that Elia Kazan later said it looked like an advertisement for Cosmopolitan magazine, right? This is a very clean shtetl, and a very clean town. And that I would actually fault in terms of art direction. And I would say that this is, Barbra Streisand is a first-time director here. And again, is this a compromise to be made for making it more popular? Maybe. I mean, is it something that comes out of sort of the musical tradition? I mean, that it's musicals are not at this time known for being sort of grimy, right? I mean, it's go back and look at West Side Story from the original. We'll see what Steven Spielberg does with the remake of West Side Story, but that's a pretty clean version of gang life in what part of New York are they supposed to be in? I'm not sure. Is that the Bronx or Harlem? I mean, where are they? But it's rather clean. So the same can be said of Yentl. I think that the shtetl looks, everybody is well washed and clean, and without going overboard, I think Fiddler on the Roof changes that dynamic a little bit. There's dirt that looks like dirt and hay that looks like hay, and some things like that. So it's a nevertheless a fascinating piece and a really interesting um, adaptation of this story. And you know, we shouldn't complain too much that the movie doesn't conform to the same lines of the story. I mean, that's what happens when things get adapted, right? You know, but it's definitely worth you know, comparing and contrasting the two. Uh, I'm very curious about this switch from the 1870s to the early 1900s. I made one case for it in terms of you know, the ability to emigrate. I mean, the story ends with Anshel having revealed himself to Avigdor as a woman, writes a get, a divorce document for Hadass, and then disappears, presumably going off still as Anshel to find a different yeshiva, because the most important thing to Anshel in the story is the ability to study, right? It's again, the story is less about kind of a proto-feminism in a sense than it is about the this particular character and her relentless desire to study, and that's really all she wants. So I see that some folks are raising their hands and stuff, so we can take a few. I mean, mine says Alice. Alice,
Yeah.
do you want to say
Yeah, well, Rabbi, this goes along with what you said with the change of the story from the 1870s to the movie to 1904. I was thinking, I mean, I just made this up in my head, but I'm wondering if it was an attempt of Barbara Streisand to kind of tell her family story.
Yeah.
You know, because as you said, so many of our ancestors, you know, from Eastern Europe came over in the early 1900s to, you know, the 19 teens. That was just a guess. But just one other comment about the boat scene, because I'm laughing because I think I'm remembering this correctly, that because I was a real funny girl aficionado. I was a teenager when it came out, and I just loved that story. I saw it on Broadway with Barbara Streisand, and then and then the movie. But I think I'm remembering correctly that the movie ends with, you know, Fanny Bryce on a boat singing.
Yeah.
And so I mean, when I saw Yentl, I said, wait a minute, isn't this how Funny Girl ended? So I just thought that was just an example of Barbara Streisand really putting her stamp. I mean, everything, I just like Barbara Streisand, it was just, I mean, the fact that she was the only one that sang the songs, I agree with, I mean, it was like, really? You didn't have any, this was a musical and no other character was able to sing.
Right, and why hire Mandy Patinkin, right?
Exactly.
You know, I mean, who's not well known. It's not like big stars turned down this role, by the way. I mean, Richard Gere turned down the role. I can't imagine him in the role. I mean, I think for me, one of the best things in this movie is Mandy Patinkin. You know, and he certainly became a, if not a heartthrob for everybody, he became a heartthrob for young Jewish women everywhere in this movie. You know, but you know, I think he's very good in this, in a role that's pretty thankless in a way, in a lot of ways. I mean, he's not really a nice guy. You know, in this movie. I mean, he has some redeeming features, but certainly that scene when she reveals herself, and he immediately as well, now you don't have to study anymore, shows his complete misunderstanding of this person who is presumably his best friend, right? You know, you know, and she says, what's that line? This one comes right out of this story by Singer, by the way. I wanted to study Gemara and commentaries with you, not darn your socks. Right? You know, so that's a line that Singer wrote. I mean, another one from the Singer story that isn't in the movie, I think, is I didn't want to waste my life on a baking shovel and a kneading trough. So, and I would say that's as close as Singer gets to a feminist statement. in this story. But still, I'd say his thing is much more about this commitment to learning, right? That is key to his story, right? I can't say whether she was telling her own family story. I don't know that much about Barbara Streisand's own family coming over. I do know that she said that the first line of Singer's story, which I told you, the very first line of it is after her father died, hit home for her in a very interesting way and hooked her, she said, right from that line. Barbara Streisand's father died when she was a baby. I mean, she was just 15 months old. So she credits that first line with really catching, catching the her interest and bringing her to this. I sort of jokingly say to people that, she gets on the boat to come to America and become a Reform rabbi, right? That's I mean, now we were not ordaining women until 1972 in America, but there were models, in America around this time period in the early 1900s. There were women studying at Gretz College in Philadelphia at that point already. I mean, there were already women who were very much learning. There were women studying at Jewish Theological Seminary in New York with the promise that they were not studying to become rabbis, right? Henrietta Zold is a good example. I mean, she took classes at the Jewish Theological Seminary, but she had to specifically tell the dean she was not interested in becoming a rabbi. She was just interested in learning. And she goes on to be the editor of the Jewish Publication Society, right? So, in the early part of the 20th century. So there were models in America that, maybe were not quite so clear in Europe, although I have to say in Germany,
Yes.
The first woman was ordained as a rabbi in the 1930s in Germany, and died in the Holocaust. So, it's part of sort of the insulated world that Singer writes about, that none of these characters seem to know that the Reform movement has started in 1810, right? So by 1904, it's already thriving. So,
Nancy has her hand up. Nancy
Yeah.
Coleman.
Okay. Actually, I'm just going to put it down again because we've already gone past.
Oh,
Well, my thought is Avigdor's reaction to Yentl when she reveals herself is exactly why she has to leave and why
Yeah.
she can't stay with him. He doesn't get it either. Nobody does. He reflects the biases of his time.
That's right. They can't live happily ever after together.
No,
right?
no, because
Um,
he would always want those perfect ground cookies and maybe a bit of Talmud on the side.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
I'm done.
Yeah. I'm she has to leave because she loves learning even more than she loves a man who thinks she's a boy, right? I mean, it's very complicated in a sense, right? I mean, she loves a man who thinks she's a boy. She loves a woman as well, right? She loves a woman who thinks she's a man. As men, they love each other. In the story, I don't think this is in the movie. I don't think they talk about Jonathan and David in the movie. I mean, maybe too parochial, but in the story, they definitely do. They invoke the friendship, if you like, of David and Jonathan in the Bible, where King David says of Jonathan, Saul's son, that your love for me surpasses the love of women, right? So that there's a very deep, perhaps homoerotic connection between Avigdor and Anshel, right? And then there's this kind of bond that's created between Anshel and Hadass. And then, of course, there's also a bond between Hadass and Avigdor. But it's not just a Hollywood triangle movie, right? I mean, because the love of study comes into it as well, Nancy. And so, So the stakes are very high in a sense, right, for these characters. And the story ends with a much more, a kind of a darker, more ambiguous kind of ending. I think I see hands up. Is that Shoshana? I see a bunch of hands up. So Vanessa, do you want to do that? I see Shoshana and Ed and Sue.
If people could virtually raise their hand, because I
I
can't.
did raise my hand.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Um,
Does anyone else?
I have a question. I don't understand the arrangement. It seems to me kind of concocted arrangement to make a story, because I understand the whole thing of the aguna, that you can marry the brother's wife after your death. So first, he was not a brother. So I don't know, you are the rabbi, you can say if legally it is applicable. And second, what were they thinking? This is a young man, although it was, she was a woman, but young and may live another 30 years, which means that he will not see her for another 30 years. So what were they thinking?
I may have lost track of part of that, as you're saying, but it is true that I think in the movie they run off to the Talmud and they look up a section Yebamot, which is about the levirate marriage, the idea that if a husband dies childless, the husband's brother has the responsibility of marrying the widow and giving her children in the name of the brother. So this obviously doesn't apply to this particular situation. They're not brothers. So it's definitely not an example of levirate marriage, other than Avigdor saying to Anshel, "You're as close to me as a brother," right?
But also, if a brother dies, that the brother, I mean, there is the whole story of the agunot, that the brother is marrying the dead brother's wife. But
right.
here,
the Aguna is something different. The Aguna is an abandoned wife, not a widow, right? The Aguna is someone who is still married to her husband. She doesn't have a get, and the husband has disappeared. He may be dead, but nobody knows, right? So she's still chained to that husband, so she can't remarry, unless the Beit Din does something for her in terms of declaring the husband dead, and then she becomes a widow, and then she can be married. But so the Aguna is different than the levirate marriage question. So what happens at the end of the story and at the end of the movie, I don't remember if they say how explicitly they say it at the end of the movie.
It was not constant. Yeah.
Anshel doesn't just disappear. She writes a divorce document, right? She gives a get to Hadass so that Hadass is now free to marry Avigdor. In the story, Avigdor has to write a get also. He has to write a get for the widow that he's married to, Pesha, but freeing her once again as well. But so it doesn't quite conform, certainly, to the story that they're talking about in Talmud. As I said, I mean, they're looking at it sort of symbolically. Avigdor isn't dead, and Anshel is as close to him as a brother. So he tries to convince her that it's best for her to marry Hadass. It will make him happy. In the story, by the way, it's almost an act of vengeance. When Anshel decides to marry Hadass, it's because Hadass has rejected Avigdor, whom she loves, right? So she marries Hadass as a kind of a vengeance, knowing that this can never be kind of a real marriage, and certainly that she can't have children and all those things. It's sort of much earthier in the story in a way than it gets to be in the movie. I think it hits pretty hard. But you know, and then it's also a question of Anshul convincing herself that she can do this, right? That I realize I'm mixing up my pronouns quite a bit today. That's actually kind of one of the beauties of the story too, that actually in Singer's story, you know, uses multiple different pronouns for Anshul and for Yentl, right? Sometimes she's a he and sometimes a she, and you know, not always what you expect. So it's so this, you know, nowadays, I mean, a lot of us, you can see Vanessa on her screen has her pronouns there, you know, and a lot of people on Zoom are doing this, putting up their pronouns. And a lot of times, particularly when we meet with younger people, one of the things that happens is we go around, people introduce themselves and say what pronouns they prefer, right? It's you know, this predates that by 5 or 6 decades. This mixture of pronouns. So anyway, did that answer what you were asking, Shoshana? I mean, you know,
you
Yagona is different than the widow.
that is fine. You answered most of it, but
Okay. All right. So I think Ed
has his hand up, yeah.
I think it should not be forgotten, but in the movie, when Yentl reveals herself as a woman to Abidor,
yeah,
he goes crazy. He says, "No, you're a divuk. You're something. Right. You're an illusion. What have you?" He goes nuts about it, and as maybe that's realistic, he feels that he's not really seeing a woman. Yeah. So that was, you know, I felt an important nuance in the movie. Mm-hmm. And then secondly, just as an observation, I always wondered where she got her money. Her father was, he was a rabbi. He was, you know, he didn't have anything to speak of, but she always seemed to have money to do things, to dress nicely, to go here and there, and to buy a ticket on a boat to go to the United States. I kind of just curiosity where she got her money.
Right. Well, that's a pretty interesting question. I'd say that, you know, this falls into some of the same sort of category of the fantasy of this movie, in the same way that the shtetl is so clean and you know, everybody's always so clean all the time, right? It's a similar kind of thing. You know, none of the people in the yeshiva seem to be worried about money, right? They're not worried about money. They're not worried about anti-Semitism. I mean, this is 1904, a year after the Kishinev pogroms, and you know, nobody seems to be worried about the existential threat, right, to their way of life. It's a fantasy in that sense, right? So now, while it would be true in a sense that the source of funding for yeshiva tends to come from fundraising, you know, it's not from tuition from the students. You know, it's much the same way now, right? I mean, it's, you know, the community chest supports the yeshiva, which supports the students, you know, but that doesn't mean they have plenty, which they seem to have here, right? And so, you know, how does she have the money to buy a boat ticket? And she's not even in steerage, right? I mean, because she's on the deck. So I don't know. You know, the movie does not answer this question, and I think you just have to call it fantasy, right? In that sense. Yeah. I think Sue's been waiting a while. Yeah.
Mute. 2 comments. First of all, Rabbi, you already touched upon kind of a homosexuality theme. In one scene, I felt like there was like a bisexual thing going on between Amy Irving's character and Barbara Streisand's character. Wonder if anybody else thought that.
Well, so are you suggesting that the character Hadass knows that Anshel is a woman?
No, but I think Anshel was attracted
Yes,
to Hadass
right.
in a sexual way. I did it
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Yeah.
I
Uh,
I think so. I think that that shows in the movie. I think it shows in the story too. And it's uh how how do how do we put this? I took some notes on this. I'm trying to find them. But it's really one of the um one of the things, a man transvestism, it
mm,
does not
yeah.
define sexuality, typically, right? I'm, so it's so there's an amalgam here of all kinds of things going on, which is really about, and I guess I would come back to Singer's story about this, that there is this binary, that we are kind of all a part of in some ways, right? That everything is this or that. I mean, you could sort of sum it up for, does Yentl light candles or make kiddush, right? Um, it's she defines the mystery of what a category is and what function it serves, right? So is she male or female? Is she responsible for the mitzvot that men are responsible for, or for the few mitzvot that women are responsible for? I mean, one would say that the primary mitzvah that women are responsible for is having children, but there are also others like lighting candles and things like that. But most of the mitzvot fall on men to say. There's a prayer in traditional Judaism. We don't have it. We have edited it in our prayer book. But in the daily blessings, Orthodox men say a blessing, thank God for not making me a woman. Now, one of the, that's a nasty sounding blessing in some ways, right? It's very different than thanking God for making you a man. Now, on some level, what this prayer is saying is, thank you for making me subject to all of the mitzvot, right? But that's not what it says. So, I mean, we are dealing with a patriarchy, that defines us in some ways. There's a book by Judith Plaskow, Judaism from a Feminist Perspective. It came out about 30 years ago. And she wrote in it that, like women in many cultures, Jewish women have been projected as other. Named by a male community that perceives itself as normative, women are part of a Jewish tradition without its sources and structures reflecting our experience. Women are Jews, but they do not define Jewishness. We live, work, and struggle, but our experiences are not recorded, and what is recorded formulates our experience on male terms. The central categories of God, Torah, and Israel are all constructed from male perspectives. I think to some extent that relates to what Ed said before, about him going crazy when he finds out that she's a woman, right? I mean, he's so locked into this binary perspective that this is what men do and this is what women do. And if you're not doing what women do and you're trying to do what men do, you must be a Dybbuk, you must be a demon, right? You must be here to tempt me into something I shouldn't be doing. And so that's, I think, kind of what you're getting at too, is that this character, it is challenging the idea of category, right? What category does this character fall into, right? And if you think about it, and I'd say this is maybe more evident in the story than in the movie, this is not just a challenge to women being able to study. I mean, this is a challenge to category, right? That there are no categories, And that's kind of where we are in 2020, sort of, when, not only is the question, is your pronoun he or she, some people's pronoun is they, right? It's predates a lot of this stuff, right? Which probably should bring me to come to a kind of a close here. It's really it's an idea of sort of opening the binary of culture. And I wanted to end by saying, you probably know that Barbra Streisand is an icon for homosexuals in this country. And to some extent, she's an icon for Jews too. And I just wanted to finish by sort of saying why I think that, some of the reasons that I think that's the case. And there, because it's much more than just a love of Broadway, right? I mean, that's, maybe it's a stereotype of gay men that they love Broadway. Maybe it's a stereotype of Jews that we love Broadway. But I think, I wouldn't totally discount some of those things. But more importantly, as we said right from the beginning of our talk today, this is Barbra Streisand's willingness to challenge the system, to not stay in the category that she's supposed to stay in, right? That she's going to produce and direct and things like that. That's very attractive to people who also are challenging the binary, challenging the system. Her desire to be true to herself. I mean, there's a story about Funny Girl that when they were making the movie, she refused to come in for a screen test, right? Of course, she'd been playing the part on Broadway. If you want to see me play Fanny Brice, come see me on Broadway, right? I don't need to do a screen test. I don't need to hear that I should change my nose, which, by the way, is something that Fanny Brice did do in her life, but that Barbra Streisand resisted all along the way. So, to be true to herself, the very fact that she's been snubbed in many times by the Academy Awards, right? This movie is nominated for things, but she's not nominated, neither as an actress or a director for this. A few years later, she makes the movie The Prince of Tides, which is nominated in every category, just about, all the major ones: Best Picture, Best Actor, Best Supporting Actress, Best Screenplay, does not get a nomination for Best Director, right? So Barbra Streisand has an outsider status that, again, I think is attractive both to Jews and to her homosexual fans. Her unabashed liberalism, of course, also plays in parts of the communities. And the fact that she makes all of this stuff of marching to her own drum pay off, right? And this movie was very successful. She's a huge star. She, I think, has had a #1 album in every decade since the 1960s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 10s, and I don't know if she's released something in 2020, in the 2020s yet, but 5 decades with a #1 album. I'm not sure anybody else has done that, right? So she has made doing it her own way pay off. And I think that makes her an icon for those who want to do it their own way, who see themselves as outsiders. And this story, in some ways, is deeply enmeshed in the Barbra Streisand story. And so the fact that she appears in every scene makes perfect sense.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Yep, that's what I got for you.
Next week we have, as we said before, Fiddler on the Roof. And if you want to come to another outrageous person who's, was out of the box, please come next Monday. The Outrageous Sophie Tucker. It's a 2014 documentary, and there's a lot of really interesting things about her. And I had always heard her name, but now I feel like I know a little bit more about her after watching the documentary.
Yeah.
Thank you, Alice. It's good to see everyone. And I put the Lotke thing, I put where to get the book in the chat. And if you need anything else, just let me know.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.
As always, if
Wonderful.
you have other comments, feel free to email me, you know.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Sure, my pleasure.
Bye-bye.